Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. We're going to be talking about judicial races, and I know certainly a little bit later in the next hour we'll get into the Supreme Court judicial races, and one in particular, confirmation hearing, that a lot of people are talking about right now. But I know as a voter, you're probably saying, one of the difficulties you might have is, I know who's at the top of the ticket, but as I work my way down to my state senator, my state representative, by the time I get to the judges, I don't know much about them, and I don't know how to make good decisions about them. And so I thought that this would be an excellent public service, as I had an opportunity today to bring in an individual who actually is running for an office where she has already been appointed by Governor Greg Abbott. And so not only will you get to know her, but you'll learn a little bit more about this whole issue of how you might be able to choose some of those judicial individuals that are actually going to be serving you, in this case, in Dallas County. And then also, because we are privileged to have with us today Judge Livia Francis, we are going to be also talking about some of the things she's prosecuted, in particular the issue of sexual trafficking. She's been a practicing criminal law judge and prosecutor for many years, and has also been able to develop that skill first at the Dallas County District Attorney's Office. Was appointed first by Governor Perry to one particular position, and now has been appointed to another position by Governor Greg Abbott. And so she joins me now in studio. So, Livia, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Let's, if we can, talk about that for just a minute, because, you know, we now have you, of course, appointed to the 283rd District Court. In the past, I know you were also a judge in CDC 7, and in both cases appointed by two different governors. And so you've had a chance, perhaps more than most, to see the life of a prosecutor, a life of a defense attorney, a life as a judge, a person working in these various areas, including the Dallas County District Office. And so as a result, you bring a lot of expertise to this particular position, don't you?
I believe I do. I believe after I did my private practice, I really got a perspective after defending individuals that were accused of a crime. I didn't have that perspective before when I was appointed to the bench almost 12 years ago. But it really did open my eyes to the individuals I was representing, their history. I learned a lot about people and why they were there. Many times, as I would tell family and friends, they're not bad per se, but have done bad things. Mm-hmm. And then you get to know them and you learn about their life experiences. And even though it's not an excuse, it certainly does explain a lot of things that maybe they're doing or their life choices. So I think by being appointed to this current bench, the 283rd, I do bring that new perspective to my judicial experience.
Well, and again, you run into people in very difficult sets of circumstances. We're not talking traffic tickets here. We're talking about, major issues that you need to pay attention to. There's rules of evidence. There is what is allowed or not allowed in various courts. There's a selection of juries in many cases. So this is, I think, something that people need to pay attention to, because in just a few weeks, we're going to have early voting. And some of these people are going to have a chance, that are listening to this broadcast, to have a chance to vote for you or your opponent, vote for a variety of other judges. And most people simply don't know too much about what is involved in selecting an individual that will actually sit on the bench.
And I totally agree with that. I don't believe the bench is somewhere you learn your trade.
Yes.
I've had 23 years experience in criminal law. There are rules of evidence that must be learned. The law is ever changing. Penal codes change, codes of criminal procedure change, and unless you are practicing it, you're not aware of these changes. And I believe this bench is too serious, the offenses that are heard, to be taken. It needs to be taken seriously. The law needs to be known. The procedure needs to be known. It shouldn't be learned while you are sitting on the bench. And I believe my 23 years of experience as a prosecutor, a defense attorney, and as a judge, I bring that to the bench.
Yeah. And one of the things I was going to bring up, and you did, is that you don't really want on-the-job training here if you are a judge in whether it's Dallas County, Collin County, Tarrant County, wherever our listeners might be located. You really need to evaluate the prior experience of some of those individuals on the ballot, don't you?
I do think so. And I think you need to really look at it. Sometimes people use certain titles that may give the impression of experience, but really does not. I was a trial lawyer. That's what I wanted to do when I got out of law school. The DA's office was a perfect place to learn how to try cases. I did that for 14 years. And then private practice, I went to trial quite a bit as a defense lawyer. And now as a judge, not this time, but the time 12 years ago, learned about jury selection. Jury charges are very important. Those are things that a lot of people don't consider. Those are matters that could possibly come up on appeal and that could end up coming back to court if a judge didn't do something correct.
Well, and again, we have some people running for county judge, and they don't necessarily have to have legal experience. Of course, I might just mention that you're a graduate of the University of Texas at Austin and the South Texas College of Law. But I have seen some individuals running for judicial positions where they not only don't have a law degree, they don't seem to have any legal experience. And the only way they seem to get elected is because they have the right political affiliation next to their name.
Well, JPs, Justice of the Peace, do not need to be attorneys.
Right.
Do not need to have a law degree. Now, if you are running for a county bench where you hear criminal matters, misdemeanors,
right,
such as driving while intoxicated, you do need to have you need to at least have a bar license.
Yes.
But I do believe you need to have that experience in a courtroom to understand how it's run, things that need to be changed or kept. These are things that a person who's been involved in the courthouse would be able to bring to the bench.
Well, again, let's take a break. And when we come back, I want to talk a little bit more about how to judge the judicial philosophy, where we could go to find some of that information. But I thought I would say something which you don't have to agree with or disagree with. It wouldn't be a good Kerby Anderson program without something controversial. And that is, when I used to live in Dallas County, I was struck by the fact that when I lived there, most people were being elected to the bench because they were Republican, because it was primarily a Republican kind of situation in Dallas for a while. And then sometimes I've served on the jury. Other times I've had friends that worked there and said, some of these individuals were elected to the bench simply because they had an R next to their name, and they, have a couple of cases, weren't all that qualified. Now it's kind of reverse. If you're a Democrat, you have a better chance of being elected there. And I'm hoping that our listeners won't just vote straight ticket, but really evaluate who is down on that ballot, who has expertise, and not always punch that straight ticket voting, because just the problem we used to have in the past, I suspect we still might have in the present, although I don't live in Dallas County now, so I can't speak to any specific case, but it's something to think about. So when we come back and you say, okay, I'd really like to know how to make some choices about these judges, because they're going to influence my community, and how do they stand on issues of crime? How do they stand on some of these very important issues? That's why we're privileged to have Judge Francis in studio today. We're going to take a break and come back and continue our conversation. By the way, if you'd like to join us, you're welcome to ask a question. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, whenever you are having a debate or discussion, it is essential that you define your terms. This is especially true in any discussion about socialism. Actor Jim Carrey recently said he was tired of hearing talk show commentators say that socialism is a failure. He concluded that we have to say yes to socialism, to the word and everything. Anders Hegstrom, in one of his videos, asked, what does socialism mean to him? He says that conversations about socialism often go like this. A liberal says we should be socialist. A conservative points to Venezuela and says socialism doesn't work. A liberal says, what about Sweden and Norway? The conservative then points out that those countries aren't actually socialist. Even if we accept the comment by liberals, there's a problem. Nordic countries have tiny populations of less than 10 million, and copying and pasting their policies to a country of 330 million isn't going to work. These Nordic countries were successful before they adopted the redistributive policies they have now. There's a more important point. Anders Hegstrom reminds us that the policies of true socialists like Senator Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez go far beyond what the Nordic countries have. For example, Bernie Sanders wants a planned economy. None of the Nordic states have this. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez wants to abolish profit. None of the Nordic countries have done that, and both of them want a universal minimum wage. None of the Nordic states have that. Are there any socialist countries that have those policies? Yes, those would be the countries of Venezuela, Cuba, and the former Soviet Union. Those are the countries conservatives often point to as why we don't want socialism. Remember this in your next discussion about socialism. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Universal 1440, Unbroken, Path to Redemption, the rest of World War II hero Louis Zamperini's true story, now playing, rated PG-13.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
In studio with me today, Judge Francis, and if you'd like to know a little bit more about her, first of all, you can see her picture on our website, pointofview.net. Click the See More button, and then it will take you to her website, which, again, you can just find livia4judge.com, and it's the number 4. You don't have to remember all that because we have a link right there at pointofview.net, and it will give you all the information about the fact that she serves right now in the 283rd District Court. And I mentioned just in passing, but I thought I'd mention it one more time, that part of the problem I think we've had with judges is people voting straight ticket. Now, in a couple of years from now, that won't happen anymore. They're going to change that. I know that in Collin County, where I live right now, since I'm precinct chairman, we have found that more Democrats vote straight ticket than Republicans do, by a significant percentage. But eventually, we may have no longer have these partisan cases. I'm originally from California. I know that isn't the case. But right now, and we can have that debate another day, as whether or not we should have these kinds of races and partisan races. But that's the reality. You find yourself right now running as a Republican against an individual who's a magistrate as a Democrat. And so if they vote straight party, you lose simply because they don't really take the time to check out who you are and what your expertise are. So that's got to be something that you've got to climb as a very significant hill in this election, don't you?
It is a challenge. I do wish that voters would do more homework on the candidates. I certainly do.
Mm-hmm.
I know, as you stated, Republican voters tend to vote for people they know or who they research more than the Democrats, who do tend to vote straight ticket. But as you stated, in 2020, that will change. The straight ticket vote will no longer be available. And I'm hoping with that, people will take more time to do research of each and each candidate running.
And again, I want to just say something, because as you get down on the ticket, whether you vote straight ticket or not, there are people that don't know those, and better to leave it empty than to actually cast a vote. But let's say we come back to, how do you make those decisions? I have people all the time asking me, do you know these judges? And the reality is, yes, I do. Lots of times I go to various meetings. I get a chance to meet them. We've had public forums, sometimes even in our own church, where you get a chance to meet them and interact with them. But for the average person, can they go to the American Bar Association? Can they go on the website? To me, that, I think, has changed everything. Whereas before, I guess I'm the oldest one around the table, I remember when we didn't have websites, Facebook pages, I can really get very quickly an understanding of some of the judicial philosophy by checking out the web pages and the Facebook pages of some of the judges. Talk about that.
Right. At the courthouse, even though it's not a big community, I know that a lot of people are asked by friends and family who are not familiar with the courthouse, who should I vote for? And based on their experience and knowledge of each candidate, because it is a small community, they are able to give recommendations.
Mm-hmm.
Now, whether or not friends and family will follow that recommendation, we don't know. But they have firsthand knowledge of each person who is running. And I think that is a good source. If you know someone who works at the courthouse, as an attorney, a clerk, a bailiff, or probation officer, anybody who's in that system, I would ask them, do you know this candidate, and is this person someone I should vote for? And if so, why?
Yeah.
And I think knowledge is power, and with more knowledge, you're able to make better decisions of who your elected officials are.
I think you should also pay attention, like I said, to who endorses you. The difficulty that I think a lot of our listeners have is, in just a week, we're going to start posting some of these voter guides.
Right.
And these are produced by all sorts of pro-family groups, pro-life groups, Chamber of Commerce groups, and all the rest. And we try to give you as many links as possible. And that's really easy. I can see who and how an individual voted in the Texas Senate, in the Texas House, if they weren't maybe an incumbent, what other things they've done in a city council race or whatever. For those of you that are judges, that's a little tougher, but by looking at people that endorse you, that gives you a little bit of an indication of a person's political and judicial philosophy, doesn't it?
I think it gives them, on a judicial basis, more of that person's personal philosophy. As judges, we are to follow the rule of law.
Right.
We may not agree with the law that has come in before us, but we must follow it.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe the endorsement is more of a personal philosophy than a judicial philosophy. My philosophy is we are to follow the rule of law.
Yes.
I'm not to sit there on the bench to make law. I'm not an activist, not to create anything. I'm there to follow the law. Whether I agree with it or not really should not be the point. If I wasn't happy with the law, then I'd be running for something different than a judicial bench. But my job is to make sure that the law is followed and applied correctly.
One other thing I thought I'd mention is that you can also do a Google search. I mean, not that this happens too much in these races, but occasionally if you do a search and find out that there has been some allegation of judicial malfeasance or something in that regard, or their history. Of course, that's even surfaced right now on the senatorial race, U.S. Senate race, DWI. Okay, what about that? Those are some questions that are certainly relevant as well as you make your decision about who you might vote for and judge.
I believe it might, for many people, past history could become a very viable reason to vote or not vote for somebody. But I believe that still is a personal choice of voter. Some people may be like, well, that's past.
Yeah.
And they've made their amends, and we're going to look at what they bring now. Or others may be, well, if they had bad judgment then, what kind of judgment do they have now?
Right.
So I do depend. That's an individual decision.
Yes.
To make or break a candidate.
So again, just a couple of things to help you understand that. If you'd like to ask a question, 1-800-351-1212. Might mention we also broadcast on Facebook Live, so if you want to leave a post or a question there, we'll post those in just a few minutes. But Judge Francis, I want to talk a little bit about one of the issues that you have dealt with. And of course, you've dealt with crimes of child abuse, sexual assault, aggravated robberies, murder, and all the rest. But I know one of the topics we did announce we would address is the issue of sexual trafficking. We have done some Outlook magazine articles on that. Where are we? It seems to me that we've moved from a time in which we had, I think, a fair number of listeners. I remember the first time we covered this issue of sexual trafficking, I had a former member of Congress talk about this, and I had people literally calling in saying, this is not an issue, can't possibly be because the mainstream press is not covering it. But now I think we're getting to the point where people recognize this is a real issue we need to address, even in places like Dallas County.
Definitely need to. Texas is second behind California as the number of victims in human trafficking. And we're not just talking about sexual trafficking. We're talking about a person in servitude who are forced to work in, I believe that what I've seen and read is construction, domestic service, restaurants, who have come here hoping to find a better life and then gotten themselves entangled into an organization. And that's what it is. It is an organization, and it cannot get out of. The sexual trafficking tends to be more with women and youths who are at risk. And Dallas-Fort Worth is a big hub. Behind Houston, Dallas is the second largest city that has this problem in Texas. And I think it really came to the forefront when Dallas hosted the Super Bowl. And that's when people began to talk about it, realize that it is a real problem and that it is a billion-dollar industry and that it affects people that you may not be aware of. And I think it's something that the community does need to become more cognizant of.
And again, you've actually defined it the way I've actually seen it, because I saw that before the Super Bowl here in Dallas, sometimes when we would bring this up, a lot of people say, I don't think so. You're talking about something that's probably just an urban myth. But after that, I think it really did begin to surface. And I think it illustrates a point, which we'll come back to after the break, and that is people say, well, slavery doesn't exist anymore. Technically not, but servitude really does as well. And I want to talk about what we can do, because we oftentimes hear the phrase in terms of terrorism, if you see something, say something. And it seems to me that we have some great examples of people that have been able to see something and were willing to say something. One that we talked about on the program just the other day is this individual working at a counter for American Airlines saw these two girls getting a first-class ticket to New York and stopped and said, this doesn't seem right. And, of course, it wasn't right. They were being told that they would go and be models in New York City. Didn't happen. How kids can be so naive in this day and age for that. I know of individuals in servitude where, you get talking to some laborer and they're looking around the whole time and you're saying, okay, either they're here illegally and they're afraid that ICE is going to pick them up, or they're looking around because their boss is going to make sure that you don't find out that they're in some kind of servitude. So I want to come back and talk about what we can do, because we can learn from some lessons vicariously from an individual that's been prosecuting this as well as adjudicating this. But let's take a break. By the way, if you'd like to join our conversation, you're free to do so. 1-800-351-1212. If you'd like to leave a message on our Facebook page, Point of View Radio Talk Show, and it's available there as well. We'll continue our conversation with Judge Francis right after this.
It wasn't long ago, it seemed, every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands, and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team, or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212, or just sit back and learn a little bit more about how to make choices for judges, because you're going to have to make those choices in just a few weeks. But I also thought we might talk for just a minute, Judge Francis, about what is on your website. It is livia4judge.com. Now, people can type all that out. It's the number 4, but the good news is just go to pointofview.net and it will take you there. You actually have quite a bit of information in case people wanted to know what kind of cases you actually are considering, how you've already been working in the 283rd District Court and some things like that. But talk about what people will find when they land on your website.
Well, my website gives quite a bit of information about me and my qualifications, and maybe a little bit about my philosophy as far as what I believe is important or factors right now that are affecting the judicial system that I'm passionate about.
Mm-hmm.
I believe mental illness is a huge factor in the criminal justice system that needs to be addressed. I'm seeing an influx of younger people. Heroin is back on the rise, and that is a huge issue amongst my younger defendants. And just the caseloads. It is the judge's responsibility to make sure cases get heard, because there are victims who are waiting to be heard, and even those that are accused who are waiting for their day in court. And I think you have to be able to balance a lot of things as a judge, and those are things that are very important to me. It also gives a little background about my education, my experience as a prosecutor, as a defense attorney, and as a judge. And then also there's a page which kind of gives you a little insight into what this court actually does. It is a felony criminal district court. We hear serious offenses that those who are found guilty in this type of court could possibly go to the penitentiary.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's some of the stories, Dallas Morning News articles of some of the big cases that I've heard, very terrible cases that I presided over, and then how you can join the campaign effort and also to donate.
Well, again, I would encourage people to find candidates that they'd like to get behind and walk precincts. And I say that as a person that's put a fair amount of shoe leather on the various pavements. My dad first ran for the California Assembly when I was 12 years old. So starting at the age of 12, and I won't tell you how old I am now, but it's more than 50 years later, walking precincts. And so that's helpful. Putting up a sign. Maybe somebody says, well, I didn't know anything about Livia Francis, and I'd like to maybe put a sign in my yard. Mm-hmm. They can do that, or they can contact you or donate or something like that, right?
They can. It's everybody asks me, well, what district are you in? Because they see the 283rd.
Right. Mm-hmm.
It's not a district like your state rep or state senator is, or even a JP. It is the entire Dallas County that can vote for this particular race. So it makes it very difficult to be able to make maybe that one-on-one connection. You can't knock on every door in Dallas County like you might be able to if you were running as a state rep. So certainly going to the website, becoming more knowledgeable, talking to people who might have some insight into the courthouse certainly is very important. But if someone does go to the website and say, hey, I really like this gal, I'd love to help her more, a sign to put in the yard. Meet and greets are wonderful. I love meet and greets because that way you can meet people outside of the party and outside the courthouse who just wants to learn more about a candidate. So if anybody's willing to do that, I'm willing to come and meet your friends and neighbors just to talk more about what I do and get to know me better.
And I might just say that if you are not in Dallas County, I have actually worked for candidates in Parker County. When I lived in Dallas County, I worked for candidates in Collin County. Now I live in Collin County. I've been working at least in one case for a Dallas County. I guess I could add you as a second one in a very indirect way, just having you on the program today. So recognize that just because you're not in that place, you could either help or encourage people that you know to be involved in that as well.
Absolutely. My own mother does not live in Dallas County. She lives in Collin County, but anybody she knows in Dallas, she's encouraging them to come vote, donate, put a yard in their sign, and same with other family or friends who don't live in Dallas County to do the same thing, because really every vote is going to be needed in this election.
Let's come back to the couple of issues that we've put on the table. One was sexual trafficking. Before we went to the break, I just mentioned the fact that to see something, say something. It seems to me that you've had some of these horrific cases come before your court. Are there some things that we outside of the judicial system can do to bring about some kind of change in this issue of trafficking or compelled labor and slavery and all sorts of things and servitude?
I really do think it's just keeping your eyes open and your ears. I think I just recently read an article about a bust in Irving where one of the victims, through an ice cream vendor who had the courage enough to help her escape her living situation, then when followed up with an arrest of a man and a woman who was running sex trafficking out of their homes. I do believe people need to understand that prostitution is not a victimless crime. A lot of time these young women and youths are being sent to hotel rooms. It's not that, and so from there they get moved from place to place.
Right.
I had a young woman who I represented who was charged with a very serious crime, and when she told me her history, it started out as a runaway at the age of 12. A man befriended her. She needed some love in her life, and she turned to this man who then used her and prostituted her out. And she would tell me, not just here in Dallas, put her on a plane, on a bus to Las Vegas. She named places, and she was maybe 14 at the time.
Right.
I'm like, somebody on that bus or plane must have seen this girl traveling and didn't say anything. So I do think you do need to be very aware that it's out there. And if you see something that just, in your gut that something's not right here, ask questions.
That's right.
Because I think if you ask, maybe then you begin to realize that something is not right here and may be able to help this person who probably is in desperate need of help but doesn't know how to do it, because fear does play a huge part in them not saying anything. They have been beaten, raped, drugged. I mean, violence is the way to keep them quiet, and that's what they've been through. So if someone could just take the effort, if they see something that is not quite right, at least ask some questions and make sure after you ask questions, you feel okay about it. And if you don't, then you need to bring the authorities in.
I certainly agree. If it doesn't look right, probably isn't. So
That's
just
right.
again, to see something, say something. You mentioned mental health. This is something I've been talking about with state legislators. You're not a legislator, but it seems to me that there are some things that can and should be done in the state of Texas in terms of mental health. But you have individuals sometimes come before your court that should have been addressed at another level. Speak to that, if you might, for just a minute.
It's a huge problem in the criminal justice system. Unfortunately, a lot of the hospitals that dealt with people with mental illness have closed.
Right.
So oftentimes our jails are now the new mental health
That is
hospital.
so true. Very true.
And I know that recently the legislature has funded money to help address some of the issues that the sheriff's departments in big cities have to deal with mental health. The wait if someone is ruled incompetent, and if they've committed what we consider as a violent crime, the wait to go to a hospital to obtain competency can be anywhere from 7 to 10 months.
Right.
Okay, so what happens to them during that 7 and 10 months that they're waiting for a hospital bed in the jail? The jail tries to maintain them, but why are we waiting 7 to 10 months before someone can go to a hospital? Families of these individuals have been dealing with it for many, many years, and they're tired. It's ruined relationships. It's ruined, and oftentimes they step back because they just can't do it anymore. And there's not enough resources to help these individuals when they're out, and oftentimes many of them are homeless out in the streets.
Right.
Caseworkers, the turnover for caseworkers are so high. Oftentimes these individuals don't want to take their medicine, so they self-medicate and they become addicted to drugs that make them feel better. It's a huge problem, and I know Dallas County has been given money to help with it, but it's just right now, there needs to be more to be done with it because it is a huge problem, and there's just not enough resources or manpower to address it to where it can become manageable.
Well, again, it's just a crisis that needs to be addressed, and I've had some of our Texas legislators on here talking about that, so we'll get back to that as well. But since you mentioned drugs, when we come back, I want to talk about that as well, because the opioid crisis is huge. More individuals die every year of opioid overdoses than all the soldiers and sailors during all of the Vietnam War. I mean, you think about that monument for the Vietnam individuals that were killed. You could put one of those up every single year just because of the opioid epidemic. Well, let's take a break. We do need to take one of those mandatory breaks. We'll come back and continue our conversation with Judge Francis right after these important messages.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The Islamic Society of Basking Ridge, New Jersey has fought City Hall for the last 4 years. The society hopes to build a mosque in the Liberty Corner section of Bernards Township, ending the 25-mile one-way drive its members must make each day to attend daily prayers. The township has rejected their application 9 times. The planning board held 39 different public hearings over 3.5 years, significantly more hearings on a site plan than any other application to date. Every time the Islamic Society amended their application, the township insisted upon additional requirements. In short, the city buried the society in endless paperwork that no other house of worship had to complete. In November of 2016, the United States Department of Justice sued the township on behalf of the Islamic Society. Less than 2 months later, they won. Those seeking to build a house of worship should never be harassed. It is both unfair and unlawful for a city to require one house of worship to meet certain standards, but allow a different religious body to ignore those same standards. This case will probably be appealed and the challenge will continue, but I hope the Islamic Society will continue to be successful. In a land that values freedom, our government should never make the free exercise of religion difficult. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Judge Livia Francis in studio with us for a few more minutes. And again, if you've just joined us, you might want to find out more information about that. You can see that we have her picture there of District 283. And so that is already available on the website. And I might also mention that if you click the See More button, it will take you to her website, and that is a way that you can find out a little bit more about her, or you can go there directly. It's livia4judge.com with the number 4, but the simplest way is just to click on her picture, and that will take you there. And just before we run out of time, I want to talk about the drug issue. We have done whole articles and our magazine, Outlook magazine, on the issue of the opioid epidemic. And when you're looking at heroin, fentanyl, then let's talk about methamphetamine. the drug issue is something that appears before your court more and more, doesn't it?
It's been a huge problem, and oftentimes drugs is the underlying reason an offense has occurred.
Right.
The 3 cases that are on my website, all capital murders, all because of drugs.
Yes.
So it is a huge problem. And as I've been doing this for 23 years, the drugs tend to change. The addiction doesn't change,
Right.
but the drugs change. And right now, heroin amongst the younger people is
Who
a
would have
huge
guessed?
problem. Who would have guessed?
I would never have guessed that.
And it is a very, very addictive drug. Very difficult to just quit. It is a very powerful drug, and it's a very deadly drug. And I'm seeing it more and more in young offenders. If they're addicted to something, it's heroin. And it's something that we need to address. It needs to be dealt with, or we're going to lose people because of this addiction, because it is very deadly.
And again, if I can represent this, having written books on subjects like Christian ethics. Matter of fact, my Christian ethics in plain language book, I'm going to have to completely revise now because there have been changes because of the internet in terms of internet gambling and internet pornography and things like that, but changes just in terms of drugs. Not so long ago, Judge Francis, we were talking about heroin as something, it was an addict in the street. It was something that you paid attention to in terms of certain zip codes. But now, because of the opioid epidemic, I don't care whether you look at old or young, rich or poor, urban or suburban, it seems to be affecting every part of our society.
It seems, and I would agree with that. How it's become so prevalent, I'm not sure how that is, but it has become prevalent. And it is. It's not a person walking aimlessly on the street and goes in to what we call a trap house or a drug house and gets it. These are people who everyday life, not your junkie on the side of the road. So it is. Oftentimes people will come to my court and you wonder, oh my goodness, this is somebody's son, daughter, someone who, went to college,
right,
and has an education, and one day, one party used, and from that point on, that's all they can think about. And I think opiates are that type. They're so strong that the desire for it and the craving is so strong that oftentimes they'll even tell you, that's all I could think about was my next hit. And, they want to stop, but it has a very strong grip on it. And I think it needs to be addressed. And I know there are courts, a lot of courts out there right now are what we call specialty courts dealing with addicts.
Right.
And, there needs to be more funding for some that maybe just address a certain type of addiction. It's overwhelming right now. There's so many people in need, and each court can only take so many. And then those who want to either have to wait or they can't participate. So there's a wonderful start right now. Dallas County has quite a number of them, but there are other things that there could be a court probably for every type of drug, every type of mental illness, and the court system would be full.
And again, that's a topic I'm going to bring to some of my legislators next time I get them in the round table here and say, okay, what are we going to do about that? But to give you a sense of how strong this addiction is, former Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich introduced us to an individual who was a Navy SEAL. Now, think about what it takes to be a Navy SEAL, having to go through Hell Week and all the things they've had to do. And he said, even though I have a strong constitution and am able to suffer things that probably most people are not, I could not shake that addiction. And that, to me, was a wake-up call that if a Navy SEAL could not break his addiction, an individual that has exercised self-discipline all of his life, it illustrates why we should, if nothing else, warn our children and our grandchildren, don't ever take it the first time. You don't know how addicted you will be. And another lesson, I think, is if you are concerned about a change in behavior in your children, begin to consider the possibility that they may have taken one of those drugs rather than show up in Judge Francis's court, right?
Exactly. Knowledge is, like I said, knowledge and being aware. if you see changes in your child, especially teenagers, everybody just thinks it's growing pains or moodiness.
Yeah.
But if it's a real change, this is unlike my child. You do need to, I'm sorry, you're going to have to start maybe snooping a little bit. There's phones, look at their text messages, see if they're sleeping, loss of appetite. A lot of those things can indicate some sort of dependency on some type of drug.
Well, again, you're running for the 283rd District Court, and I might just mention you're already there, so it's not like you're not a newbie there. You were put there by Governor Greg Abbott, and so in a sense running for re-election. But the point that I wanted to make is before we run out of time, we have a link to your website. But one more time, talk about how people can help you, because they probably have been listening saying, this is the kind of judge I want on the court, and I don't want her to lose her position. So what can I do to help you out?
Well, first thing, go and vote and tell your friends to vote. I believe voter turnout is going to be key in this midterm election. Don't think, oh, she sounds so wonderful. I don't see her having any problems winning. Don't think that way. So go and vote. Get your friends to vote. If you want to help have a sign out in your yard, I think name recognition certainly is very important. Right. So the more signs I have out there, or the more that people, if they're willing to send a personal email to friends and family, say, hey, I listened to this podcast or this radio cast, and she was wonderful. Here's the link. Listen to it and just pass it on. I really do think just getting the name out there, and as more and more people learn about me, then they can ask me. They can go to my website, ask me questions. I will answer. And I just think knowledge is certainly important in getting involved.
And I think they could actually have a party and invite you to come and speak.
I would love
went to former Senator John Corona's house, got to hear you speak there. So that would be another way to do that as well. So let me just encourage you to find out a little bit more about Judge Livia Francis, 283rd District Court, and that represents the entire county, Dallas County.
That's exactly right.
And again, the unfortunate thing that, again, I say look down the ballot. You're way down the ballot.
I am, so I know.
But the district race, the district attorney's race is beneath yours, right? So they might look all the way down there. But again, don't just look at the top of the ballot. Look all the way down to find you. Right?
Exactly, because oftentimes people just look at the top, the big state races. We've got a Senate race, congressional races, and they tend to forget us down there on the bottom. But you need to go all the way down to the ballot. But yes, the DA race, though, because it is a county race, will be after ours. And I know that's a very contested race also. But please go all the way down the ballot, because there are JPs also in county seats that are up for election. And they're going to need your votes, too. So don't stop at the top. Go all the way.
That's good. Well, Judge, thank you so very much for being in studio. It's been a delight, and let's do it again sometime.
Thank you so much, Kirby. I really appreciate the opportunity.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to be talking with Frank Gaffney about some of the Muslim candidates. We're going to be talking about, of course, Judge Kavanaugh. We have a lot to cover. We'll do that right after these important messages.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate two replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. Boy, do we have questions. Matter of fact, the next 2 hours are going to be full of questions. A little bit later, we're going to get into some of the questions for Dr. Christine Blasey Ford. As a matter of fact, I've posted this article, 23 questions for Blasey Ford that the Senate must ask, and we'll get to that in just a minute. And, of course, questions we might want to ask about the latest accusations against Judge Brett Kavanaugh. But before we get into that, because I know that will take quite a bit of time, I also wanted to talk about some of the questions we might ask for some of these Muslim political candidates who seem to have endorsed Sharia supremacy. We're going to talk about that for a few minutes and give you a chance to join the questions and comments about that. So if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212, then we'll move to the issue of Brett Kavanaugh. But those questions have been posed by our good friend Frank Gaffney. He is the president and CEO of the Center for Security Policy, individual that hosts the Secure Freedom radio program, which is an hour-long program, but also has the Secure Freedom Minute. And his commentary on September 7th were the questions that we might want to pose to some of the candidates who are Muslim and where they stand on the issue. If you're not familiar with Frank Gaffney, he's a graduate of Georgetown University, has his master's degree from the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, and also is an individual that served as the Assistant Secretary of Defense under Ronald Reagan, author of a variety of books, including War Footing, 10 Steps America Must Take to Prevail in the War for the Free World, and also co-author of the book Sharia, The Threat to America, and See No Sharia, Countering Violent Extremism, to mention just a few of the resources that are available on his website. Frank Gaffney, always great to have you on the program with us.
Kerby, it's a delight to be back with you. Thank you for having me.
And I'm thrilled about your radio program at night that many of our listeners have a chance to hear. But you also make available a Secure Freedom Minute. And so I just posted your commentary from September 7th, and that'll give people a link to some of the others. But you have been paying attention to the fact that we have a number of Muslims running for office. Fine. But you also argue that many of them are those who accept the idea of Sharia supremacy. First of all, just for our listeners, define the term and talk about what you mean.
Let me start with the term Sharia. That is a term that, unfortunately, still 17 years now after 9/11, most of us don't really know. Or at least understand its full implications. Sharia is, as you know, though, Kerby, not so much a religious practice, though there are elements to it, some say 10%, that involve sort of pietistic actions like how you pray and where and when and what you wash and what you eat and so on. But the rest of it, 90%, let's say, is basically about power. It is a doctrine embedded in the Quran and the Sunnah and the Hadiths, the sacred texts of Islam, that its authorities say are the will of Allah and must be followed faithfully by all Muslims. Some don't. I think it's important to say that right up front. Some Muslims don't follow Sharia, thank goodness. But many do, and they're told, in fact, by the authorities that as I say, it's the authoritative practice of the faith, so they must. And what that means is they must engage in jihad, not necessarily of the violent kind. Perhaps they will give money to those who do, or they will migrate, or they will otherwise seek to overwhelm a non-Muslim population by high birth rates, or they will engage in what the Muslim Brotherhood calls a sort of subversive civilization jihad. But the purpose of them, whichever form it takes, is the same, and that is to impose this program, this totalitarian, political, military, legal ideology on not only all Muslims, but the entire world. And so, in short, Sharia supremacism is a term Andy McCarthy, I think, has coined to capture this sense on the part of faithful Muslims that that's their, marching orders, if you will. That's what they must do, and they must engage, as I say, in one kind of jihad or another to advance its triumph worldwide.
And again, one of the things we have offered to our listeners, and I'll be glad to offer it again, is a booklet I put together on Sharia law, just on how that would differ from the Constitution, on the First Amendment, the Eighth Amendment, the 14th Amendment, and all the rest. So I'll make that available to any listener that doesn't already have a copy of that. That's a big issue, because if indeed you are running for Congress, you're running for the state legislature, you're running for governor, or even United States Senate, whatever that case might be, there is a sense in which if they are Sharia supremacists, they will put Sharia over the Constitution. And that's the issue, because then no longer would the Constitution, in their minds, be the supreme law of the land. Is that fair?
I think it's exactly right. Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution, of course, says it, and only it, can be the supreme law of the land. And so the idea that somebody is going to insert in its stead Sharia is fundamentally anti-constitutional. But as your book very helpfully documents, that's only one way in which this totalitarian program is at odds with the freedoms, the rights, the liberties that we take for granted in this country, but that are enshrined in our Constitution. For example, if you're a woman, the opportunity to have equal rights, not to be beaten, not to be divorced at the whim of your husband, not to be subjected to all kinds of other restrictions, including in some countries at least, not being allowed to go out of the house without a male relative accompanying you, or driving in some places. These are the sorts of things that are one of the striking facts that at a moment when there's an awful lot of talk, and I know you'll be turning to this later in the program, about sexual abuse or allegations of it on the part of men in America, it's institutionalized under Sharia that one engages in misogyny, is the fancy term for it, but treating women badly, physically, psychologically, mutilating their genitals, honor killings, on and on and on. And that's only one part of this. Of course, as you know, homosexuals can be subject to death sentences, summarily executed. Similarly, apostates. Christians and Jews don't fare so well. They're at best relegated to sort of enslaved people, second-class citizens, people who must pay the jizya tax, and other faiths get it even worse. So These are things that we find anathema, and rightly so. They are inconsistent with our Constitution, and anybody who is running for office promising to faithfully uphold the Constitution of the United States, but who embraces Sharia supremacism, is telling a lie.
We're going to take a break, and we're going to name some names when we come back. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, whenever you are having a debate or discussion, it is essential that you define your terms. This is especially true in any discussion about socialism. Actor Jim Carrey recently said he was tired of hearing talk show commentators say that socialism is a failure. He concluded that we have to say yes to socialism, to the word and everything. Anders Hegstrom, in one of his videos, asked, what does socialism mean to him? He says that conversations about socialism often go like this. A liberal says we should be socialist. A conservative points to Venezuela and says socialism doesn't work. A liberal says, what about Sweden and Norway? The conservative then points out that those countries aren't actually socialist. Even if we accept the comment by liberals, there's a problem. Nordic countries have tiny populations of less than 10 million, and copying and pasting their policies to a country of 330 million isn't going to work. These Nordic countries were successful before they adopted the redistributive policies they have now. There's a more important point. Anders Hegstrom reminds us that the policies of true socialists like Senator Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez go far beyond what the Nordic countries have. For example, Bernie Sanders wants a planned economy. None of the Nordic states have this. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez wants to abolish profit. None of the Nordic countries have done that, and both of them want a universal minimum wage. None of the Nordic states have that. Are there any socialist countries that have those policies? Yes, those would be the countries of Venezuela, Cuba, and the former Soviet Union. Those are the countries conservatives often point to as why we don't want socialism. Remember this in your next discussion about socialism. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Universal 1440, Unbroken, Path to Redemption, the rest of World War II hero Louis Zamperini's true story, now playing, rated PG-13.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Frank Gaffney with us for a few more minutes. If you would like to join our conversation, that number is 1-800-351-1212, talking about some of the questions maybe to ask of some of the Muslim candidates and whether they support Sharia law or whether they support the Constitution. And Frank, for just a minute, I might just, before we get into naming some of the names, mention that in our Sharia law booklet, we reference, of course, the good work that you do there at the Center for Security Policy, and also how over the years you've been able to document something which our liberal friends say doesn't exist, and that is that you've been able to document that indeed sometimes very important cases, often at the state level, but other places as well, sometimes rulings have been done with reference to Sharia law. So this isn't just an issue that people are thinking up to try to stimulate people to get to the polls. There have been a number of states and legislatures and others that have actually said you cannot use Sharia law to interpret the Constitution. And so this isn't just a small problem. You've been able to document that it's actually a growing problem, isn't it?
Well, it certainly seems to be. And the reason that's so, Kerby, and thank you for calling attention to the work we do. It's securefreedom.org. Most people find that easy to remember, and we invite you to check out our resources there. It's a function in part of the fact that, again, not simply because they're Muslim, but because they're pursuing a Sharia supremacist agenda, it's very worrying that lots of accommodations have been made to the agenda of such groups and front organizations of the Muslim Brotherhood, as the Council on American Islamic Relations and the Islamic Society of North America and the Islamic Circle of North America and the Muslim American Society and the Muslim Public Affairs, and on and on and on. These are groups that are assiduously working to try to create openings in which they will be able to try to force through a greater accommodation, as I say, concessions, whatever you want to call them, to Sharia. So in, I believe it's now 11, maybe even 13 states around the country, there have been, in one form or another, statutes enacted at the state level saying that the only law of the land for the purposes of that state is the U.S. Constitution. And the law is promulgated at the federal level and at the state level pursuant to it. And this is an important bulwark against the effort to create, as has been done, for example, in Britain, as you know, a kind of parallel system of law. In fact, there are something like, I believe it's 87 courts that practice and implement Sharia, not English common law. They're allowed to operate sort of side by side. And we don't want to go down that road. Needless to say, it's as I mentioned before the break, pretty hard on everybody. And so the question occurs, and I think what you've asked me to talk to is, so when you see candidates who are associated with these Muslim Brotherhood fronts, who do fundraisers for them, like Keith Ellison, for example.
There's a good example, yeah.
Or Andre Carson, or this new woman who's a candidate in Michigan, Rashida Tlaib. These are people who, at the very least, the question of whether they are themselves committed to Sharia and its supremacy by voters and non-voters alike. We all have a need to know.
And again, you mentioned that we have, of course, various radio stations in Michigan. You have the Michigan Congresswoman, Congress nominee, I should say, Rashida Tlaib. You have, of course, Keith Ellison. We have listeners that are in Minnesota. And, of course, he served as a representative, now running for Minnesota's Attorney General. Those seem like very legitimate questions to ask of those individuals, given the fact that, as you document in your commentary, they show up in some of these events. Now, just because you show up at a particular event doesn't necessarily mean you agree with it, but it's certainly worthy of some very significant questions before you put somebody like that in office, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so, of course. And it's not just showing up at the events. To some extent, these are events where the groups are raising money for the candidates. In other cases, the candidates are helping the groups raise money for their own operations. And
sure.
Again, we know these are Muslim Brotherhood fronts because they've been identified as such in federal court. Interestingly enough, in the case of the Islamic Society of North America, for example, and the predecessor to the Council on American Islamic Relations, a group called the Islamic Association for Palestine, these two groups were identified by a senior Muslim Brotherhood official as our groups, among 29 all told. So we have a pretty high confidence that these individuals who seek elective office, and in the case of Keith Ellison, let's recall, he would become the top law enforcement officer of the state of Minnesota were he to be elected. If his idea of the law of the land is not the Constitution of the United States, and he's as determined as are his supporters, the groups he hangs with, the groups he has been promoting and fundraising, as they are for having Sharia ultimately supplant the Constitution of the United States. If not for the time being, operate side by side with it, but ultimately it's supposed to get rid of this whole idea of a democratic republic. That's not consistent with Sharia, which says only Allah makes laws, and it would replace our Constitution and the freedom it guarantees. If we're, in fact, adopted and implemented by, let's just say for the purpose of discussion, the people who are seeking office at the moment.
Let's, if we can, talk about some of the resources that are available through your organization. We mentioned securefreedom.org or centerforsecuritypolicy.org. That's the link we have there, but either way, we'll get you to that. And there is, of course, your radio program, which is an hour-long program, The Minute. There are all sorts of great publications and papers and resources that are there. Of course, you've also had a coursework where people can learn more about this idea of Sharia. So talk about what people will find when they land on your website.
Well, the Center for Security Policy is really about more than just trying to raise the alarm about Sharia. We are concerned about all kinds of national security challenges and threats. But we spend a lot of time in the years before and since 9/11, as you know, Kerby, trying to particularly educate our countrymen and women about this problem of Sharia. And I mentioned earlier that one of the things that makes it so worrying is in pursuit of the supremacy of Sharia, faithful Muslims are told if they're not strong enough to use violence to accomplish that end, they need to follow the perfect model of Muhammad, who used stealthy, subversive techniques, again, what the Muslim Brotherhood calls civilization jihad, to accomplish the same goal. So among the things that your listeners would find at securefreedom.org is a whole litany of books that help explore what Sharia is, how serious a threat it is, and how it is being manifested now through the operations of the Muslim Brotherhood, these stealthy, mostly clandestine, subversive operations in institutions like our government, academia, the church, Hollywood, the financial sector, the courts, and on and on. So if people are interested, these are short, very readable monographs, and I encourage you to take a look at them. They're available for free, by the way, as downloadable PDFs. If you simply go to securefreedom.org, the Center for Security Policy Press there has them all.
I might just mention, too, that, of course, we have a link to your Facebook, Secure Freedom, as well as a Twitter account, and also, of course, the websites there as well. It's all available at the website, pointofview.net, including some questions you might want to ask of some of these Muslim candidates. And since some of you are in states and localities where those individuals are, these are questions we encourage you to ask and see if you can get satisfactory answers. So, Frank Gaffney, always great to have you on the program. Let's do it again soon.
I look forward to it. Thank you, Kerby.
Might just mention for those of you to be listening to his radio program. He has an hour-long program. Of course, he has a minute that's available. And for some of you at radio stations, you might want to consider some of that as well. Let's take a break. I have some questions that people have put together to ask Dr. Christine Blasey Ford. And we have a lot more to cover. It's all coming up right after this.
It wasn't long ago, it seemed, every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team, or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You're listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
I imagine by now some of you are just shaking your head over all the allegations and accusations against Judge Brett Kavanaugh. Let's see if we can bring you up to date and then get some of your comments. First of all, of course, one of the articles we've posted here were a series of questions that were proposed for how the Senate might address Dr. Christine Blasey Ford, who apparently is going to testify on Thursday. Of course, Judge Brett Kavanaugh for sure is going to do so. But then in the midst of all of this, you have a piece that came out in the New Yorker. Senate Democrats investigate a new allegation of sexual misconduct from Brett Kavanaugh's college years. That has to do with a claim that was made by an individual who has publicly identified herself, Deborah Ramirez, who says that when the two of them were in college at Yale University, roughly 30-plus years ago, as you know, that she said that he had done some things. And because it's a family-oriented program, I'm just tired of even talking about what is being suggested. So something that was inappropriate. Since she had been drinking heavily at the time of the alleged incident, she wasn't sure she should share it, but then decided that she would indeed do so, and now says, well, this would be appropriate for an investigation. Of course, this is exactly what some of those who have opposed Judge Kavanaugh, because once you get an FBI investigation into that, this will postpone it for a long, long time. I think the idea of trying to get Judge Kavanaugh confirmed and on the court when the court opens this time next week is out of the question now. But how much further down the road it will take is, of course, a big question there as well. So I wanted to put some questions on the table and then ask you, if you would like to call in, whether you think these are appropriate questions to ask. These are 23 questions that have been put forward by Bill Hoffman and others that I think at least give us an idea of what could be asked of Christina Blasey Ford. And there's 23. I think in the interest of time, let me just pick out a couple and see if you would think that these were appropriate questions to ask of Dr. Ford about the alleged incident between her and Judge Brett Kavanaugh. One of those is a question: you were 15 years of age when the incident allegedly happened. Press reports indicate that you told no one for 36 years. Is this true? There was no girlfriend, no family member, no school counselor. You even mentioned you had at least an unsettling experience. So I think that's a reasonable question. Now, one of the questions I want to put on the table is, do you think by even asking these questions, we would be, quote, bullying the witness? Because the implication has come from at least one senator from Hawaii that men just need to shut up. That's her words, not mine. And that, if anything, what some are suggesting is if indeed Christina Blasey Ford shows up, should they even have the men on the Senate Judiciary Committee ask the questions, or have a woman or some staff person ask those questions? So that's the first question I would put on the table. One of the other questions there is, would you waive doctor-client confidentiality and allow investigators to interview your therapist? That one, because apparently Christine Blasey Ford had not really, she said, talked about this till 2012 when they were in counseling. She and her husband were in counseling, and she mentioned it to a therapist. One of the other questions that they proposed that they might want to ask is, your July 30th letter to Senator Dianne Feinstein did not specify a year when the assault took place. Was that because you did not remember what year the assault took place? Now, this has become important because Judge Kavanaugh has said, I can now document, which I was wondering if he could, looking at our calendar from 1982, that I was not even present at that time she said this took place. But again, she didn't specify a time, but she has pretty much specified a date, 1982. So if you're talking about late spring, early summer 1982, and he's not even in the country, or he's not even in Maryland at the time, that pretty much ends that conversation pretty quickly, don't you think? Because then you could at least say, unless this is a forged document or something like that, it pretty much ends that particular conversation. So that's, I think, an appropriate question. And here's another one that hadn't really occurred to me. How did you arrive at the party that night? Did someone drop you off? Who hosted the party? Were your friends or family present? And a part of that says your correspondent states that after the assault, you left the house and went home. You were about 15, too young to drive, so how did you get home that night? That's a good question, you know. She says, I don't know how I got there. I don't know how I left. But if you walked, probably you would remember that. Even if you had a little bit of an alcohol haze, you didn't drive home. No one drove you home. You walked home. How far did you have to go? That's a reasonable question. Another question they have here is, have you ever met Judge Kavanaugh before or after the party? That's important in terms of identifying, because remember, there have been some that have suggested this could be mistaken identity, possibly. And if you really didn't know who he was and only later see a yearbook and go, oh, he's the guy, well, I can show you some others, including one that was put together before that look a little bit like him. Okay, a couple more. One of the other questions, you felt your life was in danger, but you did not notify any law enforcement entity to file a report. Is that correct? Have you ever notified any member of the law enforcement of the alleged sexual assault you experienced? So, again, I think an appropriate question to ask. A couple more real quickly. After the assault, did you ever notate this encounter in a journal, in a diary, or in a letter written either to yourself or to anyone else? And I think the answer to that will be no, but again, that's the case. Then you might remember she said she took a polygraph, or at least the Washington Post said she did. So one of the other questions they suggested might be asked, how many times did you take the polygraph? If you did it more than once, will you share all the results? In other words, did you take it one time, didn't get the right result, and take it again? That's a really good question that hadn't even occurred to me. And then here's another one real quickly. Why did you wait until 2012 to talk about your experience? And what was it that made you change your mind and decide after 3 decades of silence that you would speak out about it? Of course, the argument was we were going through counseling at the time, but I think that might generate some questions. But let's take some phone calls along the way. What are your thoughts about the allegations, first of all, by Christina Blasey Ford? What about these latest allegations coming from Deborah Ramirez? And I'll give you some maybe pushback that has come from that article in the New Yorker. But let's take some phone calls first. And we'll go to Missouri, KTTK. Debbie, what's your thoughts about this particular set of allegations that have come against Judge Brett Kavanaugh?
I think it's just another Democratic ploy to delay his appointment to the Supreme Court because of the fact that they knew that nothing that they asked him during the hearings that they had was going to thwart that situation. I'm a firm believer that the second person, because of the comment that she made, well, I came forward, so now there can be an FBI investigation. So just like the protesters that are paid for by Soros, I feel that this is a huge possibility in these two women's cases. I don't think that Brett Kavanaugh is guilty of what he's done, even though I have not heard what these women had to say. You wait 36 years to make a statement. Let me tell you something. I went to a party when I was 17 years old, and a guy tried to do things that I didn't want to do. He held me down with his arm against my neck. The first thing I did when I got home was woke my father up and told him. And my father's comment was, well, would you like me to kill him? And I said, no.
No.
But the thing is, I reported it to my parents immediately. Yes. So if it was that big of a deal, then she would have done the same thing.
And that, again, is
Just
one of the
saying.
questions they're suggesting that they might want to ask. Did you report it to law enforcement, anybody, friend, family? I just can't imagine that you wouldn't have said something, but you've raised a very good question. And let's take a break. We'll come back and take some more of your phone calls. One of the things I thought was interesting is Anderson Cooper put together a panel of women. I think there were 5. And the argument was, well, who do you believe? And the woman asking the questions on behalf of Anderson Cooper was shocked that all 5 of them said, well, we believe Brett Kavanaugh for the very reasons, Debbie, you just mentioned. That is, it took so long ago. He has had a sterling character since then. If indeed this is a pattern, it would show up again, which was the argument that has been used in other cases. Of course, maybe that's one of the reasons why Deborah Ramirez felt that she should come forward. We'll come back and address this issue of the New Yorker article, but if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The Islamic Society of Basking Ridge, New Jersey has fought City Hall for the last 4 years. The society hopes to build a mosque in the Liberty Corner section of Bernards Township, ending the 25-mile one-way drive its members must make each day to attend daily prayers. The township has rejected their application 9 times. The planning board held 39 different public hearings over 3.5 years, significantly more hearings on a site plan than any other application to date. Every time the Islamic Society amended their application, the township insisted upon additional requirements. In short, the city buried the society in endless paperwork that no other house of worship had to complete. In November of 2016, the United States Department of Justice sued the township on behalf of the Islamic Society. Less than 2 months later, they won. Those seeking to build a house of worship should never be harassed. It is both unfair and unlawful for a city to require one house of worship to meet certain standards, but allow a different religious body to ignore those same standards. This case will probably be appealed and the challenge will continue, but I hope the Islamic Society will continue to be successful. In a land that values freedom, our government should never make the free exercise of religion difficult. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
After a few more minutes, we'll take some of your phone calls, and we'll come back to this a little bit later. In the next hour, we're going to spend just a little bit of time before we get back to this topic, just to change things up a little bit, talking with our good friends at Samaritan Ministry, and then we'll get back into that. And I'll probably go into more detail in the second hour to try to begin to respond appropriately to this latest article that's in the New Yorker. Senate Democrats investigate a new allegation of sexual misconduct from Brett Kavanaugh's college years. But real quickly, before I take a phone call, let me just mention a couple of lines of question. First of all, the New Yorker was not able to find a single eyewitness to this alleged event, which was put forward. So that is significant. Number two, multiple supposed witnesses named by the accuser, which again is Deborah Ramirez, denied the event took place. One of the male classmates who Ramirez said egged on Kavanaugh denied any memory of the party, egged him on to do something, which I'm not going to describe because I'm just tired of talking about all the sexual claims when I'm not sure whether they've happened or not. And we try to make this as much a family-oriented program as possible. Another male classmate who Ramirez said was involved in the incident said, I have zero recollection of that taking place. Another point, people who knew the accuser after Yale said she never described this incident, at least until Brett Kavanaugh's Supreme Court nomination was pending. And she has been honest enough to say that, look, I was reluctant to share this because I've been drinking heavily at the time. So, but still, this is part of it. And a couple other real points, and then I'll take some phone calls. One of the accuser's best friends said, this is a woman I was best friends with. We shared intimate details of our lives, and I was never told this story by her or by anyone else. It never came up. I didn't see it. I never heard of it happening. Okay, at this point, you not only don't have any contemporaneous corroboration, but you have pretty significant denial of it from people that would know this individual. So, again, let's get a few more of your comments, one way or the other. So if you would like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let's head out to California in this case. Leslie, what's your point of view?
I think he's being railroaded. I think the Democrats know what they're doing. I think these are false accusations. I listened to Liberty, Life, and Levine last night, Levin.
Uh-huh.
And he's proven that the Democrats have done everything since '87 to destroy good people. And I think the whole thing should shut up and vote him in and get the Democrats out of there.
Well, first of all, you are in the state of California, so you have an opportunity to deal with at least one of the senators that is part of this, and we'll see where that goes. But nevertheless, that's one opportunity that you have in this election. And, of course, the other issue that people have said is, where do we go from here? Do we schedule a vote and vote the individual, this would be Brett Kavanaugh, either up or down out of the committee or end it there, and then ask for a vote in the Senate? Or do we postpone it? Do we have an FBI investigation? Do we prolong it as much as possible? Those are some questions on the table. And so let me move from the state of California to the other coast. We'll go to the state of Georgia this time. Eloise, what do you say about this issue?
Well, I do not believe the woman because, like I said, I'm 80 years old, and I was molested when I was about 10 in 1948. And I remember every detail from beginning to the end. So as far as I'm concerned, she's lying.
And again, one of the arguments that's being made is if indeed you can't remember some of the details, or as we talked about earlier with Debbie, would have reported it to your father or a family member. Those are, again, questions that I've put forward. This comes from an article that appeared in Newsmax. It's actually in their Platinum section, but since I'm a Platinum member, I thought you'd like to read the 23 questions that they're recommending, and that's one of those. Didn't you talk to somebody at the time? Did you talk to law enforcement? Something like this. So again, that is, of course, the issue of Christine Blasey Ford. But, of course, now we have a second one. I have to kind of separate these out. And that's the article that's in the New Yorker, put together by Rowan Farrow, who, by the way, and Jane Meyer, who have done some outing of other people in the hashtag #MeToo movement. But the questions being raised about Deborah Ramirez, one of the most significant was, this individual that was a very close friend with her and said we were best friends, never shared any of it, never brought any of it up. And then the argument that's sort of made in the New Yorker is the accuser is supposedly not politically motivated. Okay, somebody said, whoa. Ramirez is a registered Democrat. and an individual that you can see works for, and she actually has some document, works towards human rights, social justice, and social change. So, again, there might be some bias there, might not be, and it's something to investigate with the kind of questions that I suspect will be asked now for weeks. I thought maybe this would be resolved within a week or two, but not so convinced of it any longer. Let's go to the state of Illinois this time. WPEO. Nancy, you have the floor.
Yes, I was just wondering, thinking about things that are done as teenagers, in our years before we become an adult. Are those things to be held are we to be held accountable as an adult for those things? Is that where our society is headed? I mean, who among us have done nothing wrong as teenagers and young adults? And besides that, none of these allegations toward Brett Kavanaugh, from what I understand, have happened in the last 30-plus years. So...
Yeah, and again, the argument I would make is that if somebody made mistakes in the past and said, I learned from those mistakes, the American people are really very forgiving. Just think of all the times we've forgiven individuals, even in their adult years where they've made mistakes and said, I've learned my lesson. And we say, okay. But when you had an individual, as we talked about a month ago, who was not allowed to be given serious consideration to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals because of something he wrote when he was I think it was like a sophomore at Stanford, which, by the way, I don't think was racist, but got labeled as racist, and that's enough for everybody to go, that's enough, He was just being kind of snarky, and I just think this is dangerous at a number of different levels, and more importantly, I think, if nothing else, when you have Judge Brett Kavanaugh saying, look, if I had done something like this, and I'm waiting to hear him say this on Thursday, I'd say this and ask, for forgiveness or say I learned from it. But this didn't happen. You're accusing me of things that literally did not happen. And so that's an important issue. I want to see if we can at least get one more phone call in here, and that is Mark in South Carolina. I think you have a comment about the polygraph.
Yes. Thanks for taking my call. One of my questions that I would like to have Jim present to the young lady is that, would she submit the questions that were asked her on the polygraph?
I think that's a good question too. Yes,
because you can ask any question, assuring that someone could pass or fail a polygraph test, and they keep touting that she took it and passed it, but what questions were she asked, and who administered it, and how was she chosen, or how was this person chosen, and why was this person chosen?
Very good. And again, that's one of the 23 questions we've posted on the website. When we come back, we're going to take a little bit of a break from this for just a little bit, talk with our good friends at Samaritan Ministries, but then we'll come back to it, and I'll give you a kind of an analysis of where we stand. All that coming up right after this.
Go mobile with Point of View and take transformation with you on the go. Search in Google Play or the Apple Store for Point of View Radio, the Point of View Radio mobile app. Download it free today.
Good news. You are not stuck with your health care plan. Really. You have a choice, and it's a great one. It's called MediShare, and if you've heard about it and wondered what exactly it is, it's a way that people share their health care bills. And these are people who have a common faith, who want to be part of something beautiful that not only meets their healthcare needs, but the needs of others too. And it's people who love to save money, big time. MediShare members typically save $500 a month per family on their healthcare costs. That is a life changer for people. So this could be for you. Maybe it's what you've been looking for, a way to pay healthcare bills that's not only very smart financially, but it's even profound. MediShare is a nonprofit with 400,000 members nationwide who pray for and share with each other. So yes, you're not stuck. There's another way, and it could save you a lot. Find out more. Call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
Point of View will continue after this.
I
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today. If you'd like to join our conversation, we'll open up the phones again a little bit later. 1-800-351-1212. If you were with us the last hour, we spent some time talking about a variety of issues. We had Frank Gaffney talking about questions you might ask of various Muslim candidates and where they stand on things like Sharia law and the Constitution. Then, of course, we got into, the questions that are going to perhaps be asked of Dr. Christine Blasey Ford later this week. Posted, matter of fact, on the website, 23 questions for Blasey Ford the Senate must ask. And we mentioned a few of those, and we'll come back and get to that topic again, and also address, as I did briefly, but I will get into that in more detail this hour after our next interview, the study that came out, actually the article that came out in the New Yorker, Senate Democrats investigate a new allegation of sexual misconduct from Brett Kavanaugh's college years, talking about something he supposedly did when he was there at Yale. And so we'll talk about that and give some response to it as well. So we'll see where we go with all of that. And certainly one of the things we like to do from time to time is break it up, because, my goodness, we're going to be talking about this for a long time, I suspect. And so we'll give you a chance to express your opinions, ask questions, or make comments. But before we do so, wanted to come back to a topic we've addressed many times here on Point of View, and that is some of you that are, even right now, hearing the various congressional and senatorial candidates talking about health care, have said, health care is just getting so expensive. Health care insurance is getting so expensive. And so that's why from time to time we like to talk about these health care sharing ministries. And the nation's largest is Samaritan Ministries. And so we've talked about Medishare, we've talked about Samaritan Ministries, and we are now bringing back to the microphone Anthony Hopp. He is the Vice President of External Relations for Samaritan Ministries, one of the nation's largest healthcare sharing ministries, which is an organization now that has grown from just a few households to more than 70,000 families. Anthony, welcome back to Point of View.
Thank you, Kerby. Very good to be with you.
Let's, if we can, talk about, again, what takes place in a health sharing ministry, because I want people to recognize that they do have an option. Yes, this election is going to be whether or not you elect individuals that want to begin to modify the Affordable Care Act or implement some other kind of plan. But even apart from all the politics and economic issues, there's an opportunity for fellow Christians to minister to other Christians and to have something which I think is really biblical and certainly is a way to save money. So tell us more.
Healthcare sharing, Kerby, is a way for followers of Jesus to live out what they believe. It's really faith in action, and it's done in the practical way in the realm of healthcare by sharing one another's medical bills directly, person to person, household to household, without using any insurance at all. And the interesting thing is that not only the financial aspects of the medical need are shared, but through the direct connection that members have with one another, we're able to also pray for one another and send cards and notes of encouragement and minister to each other. So in that way, the whole medical bill is addressed, not just the financial one. And to date, we have a little bit over 80,000 households. That's over 250,000 people. And altogether, those members are sharing about $28 million every single month.
Well, and again, as you mentioned, you are praying specifically for a family. You're sending a check to a specific family. Share a little bit more about how that works, because it certainly seems to be what we find in the book of Acts. It seems like what should be part of the body of Christ, but talk about how you administrate that.
Every month, as a member, I send what's called a monthly share, and it's a set amount. I send that to another Samaritan family, and Samaritan Ministries lets me know where to send that. 11 months out of the year, that is what I'm doing. And 1 month of the year, I will send my monthly share to the office for administrative costs. So right off the bat, I know exactly how much of my money is going directly to other members to help in their medical need. So every month for the last, it's been 21 years now that my family has participated, we receive a different name and address and a brief description of the medical need, and our family has the opportunity to minister to that family, not only by sending then our monthly share, which is $4.95, but including a card or note with it. And what we hear from our members is that the cards and the notes and the support that they receive from other members tends to be the most important part of the process. That is what impacted them the most. You would think that especially in the very exorbitant medical bills, that the first thing they would talk about is, my goodness, I received hundreds of thousands of dollars from total strangers, but instead it's that our family never expected to be blessed in such a profound way through the prayers of people that we probably won't meet this side of heaven.
Just incredible. Let's talk about another aspect of this, because one of the reasons the cost is lower in many ways is because you're finding yourself in a pool. Now, again, this is not insurance, but I'm going to use the, if you will, the nomenclature for just a minute so people at least can understand it. You're in a pool of individuals that are like-minded Christian organizations and Christian ministries and Christian individuals who are in many ways not engaged in a lot of behaviors that aren't biblical, that actually drive up healthcare. So it seems to me that one of the very compelling arguments for healthcare sharing ministries is, instead of being an insurance where I'm pooled together with people that drink and smoke and engaged in sexual activity that is dangerous and all sorts of things which by definition drive the cost up, when I'm with like-minded Christians who are dedicated to a biblical lifestyle, my costs are going to be a lot less. And I think that's a very compelling argument.
I believe so. I believe it is as well. In fact, our members appreciate the fact that there's some questions that they answer prior to joining, some membership requirements that we all agree to, and they include not drinking to drunkenness, and not using illegal drugs, abstaining from sexual activity outside a heterosexual marriage, attending church regularly, and in addition, our members obtain the signature of someone to whom they're accountable. This can be a pastor or elder or deacon in the church or accountability partner or small group leader. And so you're absolutely right. That commitment to live holy lives certainly contributes to it. I think another part is that members are taking responsibility as well. They're attempting to be good stewards of their health care and make sure that they're finding fair prices, and we have tools devoted to that. But when you put that combination together of like-minded people and then also the commitment to steward the resources that the Lord has given us, to steward those wisely, then you have the makings for a very affordable health care, certainly.
Yes, a stewardship of those resources dedicated to a biblical and healthy lifestyle. That's certainly something that would be very compelling. So let me take a break, and let me give those of you that maybe have a question for Anthony an opportunity to join us first. 1-800-351-1212. I've certainly got some questions for him, but you might have some too, or maybe you've actually joined with Samaritan Ministries and want to talk a little bit about that. Feel free to give us a call, 1-800-351-1212. Then at the bottom of the hour, we're going to get back into issues in the news and finish that off, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of a break from all the things we'll be talking about for the next couple of weeks and to focus on something that would be very helpful for you and your family. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, whenever you are having a debate or discussion, it is essential that you define your terms. This is especially true in any discussion about socialism. Actor Jim Carrey recently said he was tired of hearing talk show commentators say that socialism is a failure. He concluded that we have to say yes to socialism, to the word and everything. Anders Hegstrom, in one of his videos, asked, what does socialism mean to him? He says that conversations about socialism often go like this. A liberal says we should be socialist. A conservative points to Venezuela and says socialism doesn't work. A liberal says, what about Sweden and Norway? The conservative then points out that those countries aren't actually socialist. Even if we accept the comment by liberals, there's a problem. Nordic countries have tiny populations of less than 10 million, and copying and pasting their policies to a country of 330 million isn't going to work. These Nordic countries were successful before they adopted the redistributive policies they have now. There's a more important point. Anders Hegstrom reminds us that the policies of true socialists like Senator Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez go far beyond what the Nordic countries have. For example, Bernie Sanders wants a planned economy. None of the Nordic states have this. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez wants to abolish profit. None of the Nordic countries have done that, and both of them want a universal minimum wage. None of the Nordic states have that. Are there any socialist countries that have those policies? Yes, those would be the countries of Venezuela, Cuba, and the former Soviet Union. Those are the countries conservatives often point to as why we don't want socialism. Remember this in your next discussion about socialism. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Universal 1440, Unbroken, Path to Redemption, the rest of World War II hero Louis Zamperini's true story, now playing, rated PG-13.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue our conversation today with Anthony Hopp, and he is the Vice President of External Relations for Samaritan Ministries International, one of the nation's largest healthcare sharing ministries, ministering to more than over 80,000 families. And one of the people, Anthony, I think you probably know is Brad Fisk. He's going to be with us next week. We're going to be doing our Truth Team, and he shared so many really touching stories and heartfelt stories about the impact that these various families, as they minister to one another, are having. And that's just another tremendous benefit of Samaritan Ministries, isn't it?
It really is. The stories are never lacking. We receive them every day. It seems like we receive more notes and cards. One quick one is that we have a couple, Tanner and Sarah, and they had a premature daughter who was born a few years ago. And this precious daughter was born with a serious chromosomal problem. And after 12 days, she went to be with the Lord. And so Tanner and Sarah, of course, are grieving, and their medical need was being shared with other Samaritan members. And we later found out from Sarah that she said that during this time she was crying out to the Lord one particular night when she's driving home. And she said, Lord, I'm just feeling, I'm struggling here, and I believe your word, but I would really love it if you would just, if you'd send me a sign to let me know you are near. Well, she pulled up, she got home, she goes to the mailbox and had received a note from a Samaritan member who was sharing in the need. And in addition to the financial share that she had received, there was a cross-stitched cloth that had their daughter's name, Isley, on it with a flower. And immediately Sarah knew this was from the Lord. And since then, Sarah has grown to be able to counsel in Christ other families who have lost children. And that's that story is indicative of what happens with members of loving each other and then consequently being able to pass on the love that they've received from other members.
What a great story. Let's, if we can, for just a few minutes, Anthony, talk about how people can apply, because they already probably have a little bit of an idea of what you've talked about in terms of agreeing to certain various issues and principles and having an individual to whom they're accountable. But talk about that for just a minute, because some people might say, what does it take to actually be part of Samaritan Ministries International?
2 steps, really. One is to read the guidelines, which are the details of what medical needs are shared. And the guidelines go through and provide a discussion on how healthcare sharing is very different than insurance. We go out of our way to make sure that there is no consumer confusion and that people realize this is a whole new way of doing things. And so after reading the guidelines, then the second step would be simply to fill out the application. There's not any kind of waiting period. People are able to join as soon as their application is filled out, and that's really it. And what we found is that people are so excited to be part of an option that's consistent with their faith and values that we tend to have a retention rate of nearly 90%.
And again, some people might say, okay, are there some limitations? You know, I've got pre-existing conditions, or I'm maybe not as healthy as I'd like to be. You know, give them some of the parameters so that they have a better idea of what they could do and whether or not they could actually join with you.
If pre-existing conditions will never disqualify anybody from joining. There are some different guidelines of how those pre-existing conditions are shared. Once a member has not had those pre-existing issues for 1 year, that's not a 1-year waiting period, but it's just you've been healed for 12 months. Then the condition is no longer considered pre-existing and it is shared like all other needs. But in the event that that year, that 12-month period never comes, or you're not quite there yet, we can still share those pre-existing conditions as a special prayer need. Think of it as a free will offering, where members have the opportunity to send above and beyond their assigned monthly share. And this is just a way to get some assistance to those conditions that typically aren't shared through the regular guidelines. So there aren't any disqualifications to membership as long as somebody agrees to the very basic statement of faith, has the person to whom they're accountable sign for them. They're welcome to join.
And one of the things I've heard over the years, again, I mentioned Brad Fisk, of course, I've had others call into this program telling about their own experience with you at Samaritan Ministries International, is there's always this in the back of their mind, well, what about a really catastrophic long-term care cancer case or something like that? But you've been able to cover these cases in ways that I think, again, just testify to not only the dedication of your members, but just the work of the Lord within your organization.
He certainly has provided. Since we began, we've never had a need that was too large, that was not shared in its entirety. We have an optional program called Save to Share, and this is for those medical needs that go over $250,000. And about half of the members, 55%, agree or desire to be part of this optional program, and it enables sharing $250,000 on up. And we've had at least a dozen medical needs that have gone over the $1 million mark. By God's grace, every single penny from those medical needs was shared, and so it's very affordable. The additional amount is not much at all, and so yeah, that's certainly one of the burning questions that prospective members have. Oh, this might work for those small things, but what about the really large need? And we, whether it's a large or a small need, we see the result the same, which is the members are faithful. I remember my first medical need. It wasn't quite that large, but it was in the thousands of dollars, and it was back in 1998.
Wow.
And I remember thinking when we had those medical bills coming in, oh my goodness, are my brothers and sisters in Christ, are they really going to do what they said they're going to do? And it was at that moment then when we received all of the shares and all of the encouragement that my wife and I became raving fans and said, this is exactly what the church should be doing.
Again, Acts 2, model for community among believers. Let me just also answer a question that is on your website. You can go to SamaritanMinistries.org. We have a link on our website, pointofview.net. And at the very bottom, it has Affordable Care Act, because some people say, well, aren't I supposed to have insurance? And this is obviously not insurance, but again, the very few, there's only 3 of them, essentially, 3 health care sharing ministries are exempt, which would mean that you do not have to actually enroll with the Affordable Care Act, and you don't have to pay a penalty tax. And so by enrolling in Samaritan Ministries, you are exempt from any kind of penalty. Of course, that's sort of going away anyway, but it's just one more question I suspect that Anthony, some people are having. And the good news is that this can supplant and replace and really, I think, in very significant ways, enhance your Christian living and give you a chance to provide the protection you want to provide for you and your family, but to do it in a way that's God-honoring.
It sure is. Romans 12, Paul talks about in the second half of the chapter, love in action, and Paul proceeds to give a bunch of exhortations that really describe the activity of Samaritan members. Be devoted to one another in love. Be faithful in prayer. Share with the Lord's people who are in need. Rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn. And that's really representative of what members are doing and how they're living out their faith in the area of healthcare.
And again, I'd add Galatians 6:2, bear one another's burdens, so fulfill the law of Christ, and a variety of other passages. So whether it's Acts 2 or Galatians 6 or Romans 12 and other passages, this is certainly something I wanted you to know about. So, Anthony, thank you for joining us again here on Point of View, and we'll continue to mention how these health care sharing ministries are so effective and something you really need to check into. So thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
My pleasure, Kirby. Thank you.
The website, again, is SamaritanMinistries.org. And so we have a link on the website. You can have the first item there is if you want to sign up. There's a homepage. There's also some other things about cost and all the questions maybe you have. And if we didn't answer all of them, I think we did a pretty good job in less than half an hour to answer most of the questions I've run into when people are talking about this issue. So wanted to cover that. And now let's see if we can, in this last half hour, get back to these issues. We've got a couple of issues on the table, and I'll revise and maybe summarize some of those when we come back from the break. 23 questions for Dr. Christine Blasey Ford, which may indeed take place if she does indeed show up on Thursday, which is the plan. So that's the first issue. Then, of course, you have the second issue as well, this article that has now surfaced in the New Yorker, in which you have the claims being made by Deborah Ramirez. She's now age 53. She attended Yale with Brett Kavanaugh, claimed that he did something, and I'll just leave it at that. You can read it for your own, when he was a freshman at Yale. And as, again, not like these others, talked about it, but finally decided that even though she had been drinking heavily at the time, still thought that it was appropriate for her to bring this up. And so the New Yorker magazine talks about how the Democrats have been aware of this and then brought it to the Republicans and said all they wanted to do was get a vote. So I'd like to, in this last half hour, get your comments. Should we vote? Should we postpone? Should we investigate? What's your thoughts? We'll be right back.
Protect the health of the nation. Join the Point of View Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team. Or call 800-347-5151.
Good news. You are not stuck with your health care plan. Really. You have a choice, and it's a great one. It's called Medi-Share, and if you've heard about it and wondered what exactly it is, it's a way that people share their health care bills. And these are people who have a common faith, who want to be part of something beautiful that not only meets their healthcare needs, but the needs of others too. And it's people who love to save money, big time. Medi-Share members typically save $500 a month per family on their healthcare costs. That is a life changer for people. So this could be for you. Maybe it's what you've been looking for, a way to pay healthcare bills that's not only very smart financially, but it's even profound. Medi-Share is a nonprofit with 400,000 members nationwide who pray for and share with each other. So yes, you're not stuck. There's another way, and it could save you a lot. Find out more. Call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Going to be a very interesting week. I might just mention that Thursday is the day in which Judge Brett Kavanaugh is supposed to testify. Of course, we're also assuming that will be the day in which Christine Blasey Ford will testify. That's also when President Donald Trump will meet with the Assistant Attorney General Deputy Assistant Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. So Thursday might be a really busy day. So we'll see how that all plays out. Let's, if we can, get into a couple of these issues. The first is to recognize that in the midst of all of these allegations, and they're coming from Christine Blasey Ford as well as from Deborah Ramirez, the response from Brett Kavanaugh has been pretty striking, because he actually has sent a letter to the chairman and the sub-chairman, if you will, the chairman of the Republicans, chairman of the Democrats in the Senate Judiciary, in which said he would not be intimidated. Here's what he said. He said he will not be intimidated with withdrawing. He sent the letter there. He said, these allegations are smears, pure and simple. He goes on to say they debase our public discourse, but they're also a threat to any man or woman who wishes to serve our country. He says such grotesque and obvious character assassination, if allowed to succeed, will dissuade competent and good people of all political persuasions from service. I would agree. He goes on to say, I will not be intimidated into withdrawing from this process. The coordinated effort to destroy my good name and drive me out, the vile threats of violence against my family will not drive me out. The last-minute character assassination will not succeed. And, you know, for those who have shown some sympathy, which I think is appropriate, to Christine Blasey Ford, who said that she's had some concerns and had to move out of her house, should also be leveled towards Brett Kavanaugh. You have to remember that his wife had to take the two daughters out because of all the vile things that were said in the hearing room. And as a result, the threats that they have faced as well. If you don't want to look at any of that and just kind of bury your head, and we sometimes, whenever we do a commentary on some of that, have a picture of an ostrich burying their head, and that's unfortunately the head in the sand group is still an individual or two out there. Even those of you that listen to Point of View probably don't fit into that anymore, but I think a lot of people are still in the head in the sand kind of mindset. Then you will ignore the fact that we really are almost like on the edge of a civil war. I was talking to somebody the other day in which he was making the case that if you go back and look at civil wars, I never really looked at these, and maybe I need to get to some books or maybe some YouTube videos, but almost every civil war, including the American Civil War, start with a contested election. You can certainly look at Abraham Lincoln, who was one of three candidates and was able to win. Now, of course, we've had some other contested elections, one that even went to the House of Representatives. Okay, but it's the contested election when you have division, and then you have the strife, and then eventually you have the guns. And what this individual was arguing is a lot of these civil wars, they don't start with guns. Matter of fact, guns are very far down the road. It starts with a divided country, divisions that then are exacerbated by a contested election. Now, sometimes they're not elections. Sometimes they're a coup that takes over. Maybe it's an inappropriate king that takes over. So it's not always an election. I use election in quotes. Of course, the election of Abraham Lincoln was a true election, and it was done according to the Constitution, but still people contested it, if you will, and then shots were eventually fired at Fort Sumter. You have the election of Donald Trump, which again followed the Constitution, but it's been contested ever since. Matter of fact, one of the reasons you have the president meeting with Rod Rosenstein is whether or not he was even wanting to do certain things to compromise this president. He talked about whether or not he was going to wear a wire and record the president and implement the 25th Amendment and all those kinds of things. We'll see how that all plays out. But if nothing else, we can see that the tensions are higher than they've ever been before, and this hasn't done a very good job of tamping any of them down, because there's a lot of people right now that are angry. Just think about where you come out, or whether you believe that Brett Kavanaugh is guilty or innocent. You would have to at least be angry with Senator Dianne Feinstein, because if you think he's guilty, you've got to be upset with her that she waited till the 11th hour to release this when she could have released this letter a long time ago and we wouldn't even have had to go through these hearings. If you think he is innocent, and most of you that have called in so far think that he is, then you got to be upset that she pulled this political shenanigan in the 11th hour and derailed a nomination that would have been probably voted on this week in the Senate, and he would have been able to be sitting there the first day in October for the Supreme Court. Then you got to be have people that are upset, I would think, about the fact that Christine Blasey Ford has brought these allegations but can't simply remember some of the details. And so on the one hand, you might be angry at those people that are upset that she can't remember the details. Others that are convinced that Brett Kavanaugh is innocent is upset that she has maybe had mistaken identity or maybe conflated an issue, misrepresented it or misremembered it. And so you have that. And, of course, now we have this Deborah Ramirez. People are probably upset with her. Why wouldn't they be? Because here, as we are just trying to get some resolution over the allegations from Christine Blasey Ford, now you come forward with some allegations which you said you probably weren't planning on sharing because, to use your phrase, you were reluctant to share these because you had been drinking heavily at the time of the alleged incident. But then you bring them up. And so you can see that there's just a sense of frustration. Of course, if we ever resolve this, and my fear is we never will, that there will always be a cloud hanging over the head of Judge Brett Kavanaugh. But if we resolve this and find out he is innocent, I mean, let's face it, the life of people like Deborah Ramirez and Christina Ford, they're pretty much over because they will be forever seen as the villains trying to actually vilify an individual. And as Brett Kavanaugh said just a few minutes ago as I read his letter, said that you are also making it harder and harder for people of integrity and quality and competence from running to the Supreme Court. And, of course, the biggest issue that I haven't even addressed is by now you're starting to get just a little bit weary of this. This may go on for weeks. I hope it doesn't. But, and how is this going to affect the election? Are there some people who are just going to say, I just give up. I just really don't care. I'm not going to vote. I don't even care anymore. This is a nation out of control. And so I'm not going to show up the polls and I'm not going to vote in the midterm elections. So you can just begin to see that from start to finish, we've got a problem that doesn't get itself resolved easily. But let's at least pray and hope that we find out what is the case. And, of course, on the other hand, I might, just to be fair, and they'll take a phone call, if we find out that Brett Kavanaugh has been lying the whole time, then we're going to hate him too, and there are going to be people that are just going to say, you put us through all of this when you knew full well that this shouldn't have been brought up in the first place. So there's no easy resolution to this, but let's take some phone calls because I know every one of you have got a comment or two, so let's give you that opportunity. Kathy in California, KNLB, it's Point of View.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes. Back whenever Obama was in office, there was a questionability on the FBI. And now all of a sudden the Democrats seem to want to get this investigated by the FBI. And with all this swirling around the dossier, whether it's true, not true, now they want to have a polygraph test. And I think the gentleman that called in had a legitimacy on who's going to perform that.
Yeah.
So
which questions you're going to ask and how you're going to perform it. And you brought together the two issues, the Rod Rosenstein story about being meeting with the president on Thursday, and, of course, the collusion and the Fusion GPS and the dossier and all of that with this whole investigation as well. And that is, do we really want the FBI right now in the turmoil the FBI is in to investigate any of that? So you really got a great point. Go ahead.
Yeah, because, to begin with, this should all be actually investigated by the police because they've gone back to that. But now, back whenever Obama was in, there was some incident with the FBI, I believe, over in one of the Latin American countries who they said that they had, I know this is family shows, something about prostitutes were in their hotel rooms.
That was Secret
And
Service,
so-
but the same point, the point you're making. I need to take a break, so I'll put you on hold. And Kathy, you want to stay? I want to give you a chance after the break, but I've got one of those mandatory breaks. But the point that you're making is very good. Doesn't this sound like a banana republic where we're not even sure that we can trust the investigative sources to do a fair and impartial justification? We'll be right back.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The Islamic Society of Basking Ridge, New Jersey has fought City Hall for the last 4 years. The society hopes to build a mosque in the Liberty Corner section of Bernards Township, ending the 25-mile one-way drive its members must make each day to attend daily prayers. The township has rejected their application 9 times. The planning board held 39 different public hearings over 3.5 years, significantly more hearings on a site plan than any other application to date. Every time the Islamic Society amended their application, the township insisted upon additional requirements. In short, the city buried the society in endless paperwork that no other house of worship had to complete. In November of 2016, the United States Department of Justice sued the township on behalf of the Islamic Society. Less than 2 months later, they won. Those seeking to build a house of worship should never be harassed. It is both unfair and unlawful for a city to require one house of worship to meet certain standards, but allow a different religious body to ignore those same standards. This case will probably be appealed and the challenge will continue, but I hope the Islamic Society will continue to be successful. In a land that values freedom, our government should never make the free exercise of religion difficult. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212, or just sit back and listen to some final comments. And one of those, I was talking to my producer, Steve, and we're talking about the FBI issue, which I haven't really addressed. And this is going to be on for days, so we'll be able to address each one of these in a systematic way. But let me just give you the quick answer. The FBI is called the Federal Bureau of Investigation. What do they investigate? Federal crimes. Are either of these allegations federal crimes? No, they're not. So the bottom line is, what are you going to have the FBI investigate anyway? And just in light of some of the conversation we just had with Kathy, sometimes we're not so sure we believe the FBI, or we wonder about corruption. Now, again, I don't want to paint with a broad brush. As we've said before, it may be just a few, and probably is just a few people of the FBI, and all sorts of individuals of great, outstanding character and integrity work for the FBI, and they're, and I suspect, as horrified by some of the things that have happened up there on the top floor of the FBI building as anybody else. Okay, so that's the case. But let's think this through. We're not investigating this because we would want to, quote, put Judge Brett Kavanaugh in jail, assuming that we even believed any of this took place. That's not going to happen. First of all, statute of limitations and all the rest. There's no... so the issue is not whether a crime was committed, but whether or not this is enough to invalidate an individual being put on the Supreme Court. And Russ Douthat the other day, writing for the New York Times, I think put it up best, and that is why Brett Kavanaugh or others might think about, before it's all through, resigning, because we are talking about putting a person on the court for life. This is not evaluating, as it was, a senatorial candidate in Alabama who would serve for 6 years. This is an individual that would serve on the Supreme Court for the rest of his or her life for good behavior, according to the Constitution. So the standard is very high. So we would want to still make judgments based upon, is this a person that belongs on the court? And we can have a debate and a discussion about whether some of the people on the court right now belong and should stay on the court when we talk about that standard. Individuals who were just routinely voted into the court with, in the case of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, 96 senators voted her in, when I think there were some really good questions about her judicial competence and tenure and all that. That's okay. She's there now. But again, let's recognize that we are talking about an appointment for life to the highest court in the land, making very important decisions. And so if there's still a cloud over Judge Kavanaugh, there's some people said that might be sufficient to vote against him, which may be unfair to him, but also we want to look at the broader picture of the government itself. Let me just mention, before I take some more phone calls, that we have posted some questions that I think need to be asked if indeed we have any chance of getting to the truthfulness of the claims of Christine Blasey Ford. 23 questions, and some of them are, why didn't you ever mention this to a girlfriend, a family member, a counselor? You only later reported this. Why did you do so? Even in your initial letter to Dianne Feinstein, you didn't specify a year. Now that you have, we see that Judge Brett Kavanaugh can pretty much document that he was not in Maryland at the time you say that he was. Age 15 means you didn't drive, so how did you get there? How did you get back? And if you have such hazy memory that you can't remember whether you walked to your home or somebody drove you, why should I believe necessarily what you said happened in the room? So those are, I think, reasonable questions. One, of course, we mentioned a minute ago about the polygraph. How many times did you take a polygraph? Just once? Or did you take more than one to get different answers? That's a good question. And then, of course, with this article in the New Yorker, just to remind ourselves of the fact that, again, this is a claim by Debbie Ramirez. But again, the New Yorker was not able to find a single eyewitness to this event. There were multiple supposed witnesses who deny that the event took place. And people who knew the accuser after Yale said she never described the event. And one was one of her best friends who said, this is a woman I've been best friends with. We shared intimate details of our lives. And I was never told this story by her or by anyone else. It never came up. I didn't see it. I never heard of it happening. Somewhere along the line, you have to say, there's at least a question or two to ask about that. But in the last few minutes remaining today, let's give some of you a chance to join our conversation. Let's go to Midge in Texas. What's your point of view?
Well, after 36 years, whoever this female is telling the story now. I mean, like, I want to ask her, who paid you to say that?
Let's hope not.
I'm sorry. I do not believe her at all. Judge, Mr. Kavanaugh, he's a very reputable man, a good man. Really, he's a family man. Come on. Something happened 36 years ago. Yeah, like y'all said, forgive and forget, and ask that woman who paid her to say that, because I don't believe her And that's all I have to say.
Well, that was good enough. And again, I'll just mention that Midge is representative of what surprised Anderson Cooper, because they got together, I think, if I remember right, it was 5 different women, and there was a woman asking them questions, and they were shocked. The person asking the questions on behalf of Anderson Cooper and Anderson Cooper himself were shocked that all 5 of the women said, I believe Judge Kavanaugh. And there is a difference, because when you talk about some of those individuals that we highlighted in our May issue of the Outlook magazine, those individuals who were outed by the hashtag #MeToo allegations, then certainly that would be one individual, one thing to pay attention to. And in every case, you saw subsequent situations. You might remember one of the questions about the senatorial candidate, Judge Roy Moore. When the first one came out, everybody said, well, yeah, but that was a long time ago. And then pretty soon you started having another one, you had another one, you had another one. After a while, you start saying, okay, how many shoes have to drop before we have a question? And in some respects, up until a couple of days ago, the only shoe to drop was Christina Blasey Ford. Now, of course, we have the other allegation coming from Deborah Ramirez. So, that's a little different. But in both cases, one is in high school, one is in college. And what you have had are lots and lots of people that have known Judge Kavanaugh, who I don't know. Kelly Shackelford has met him and worked with him. I've never met him, never probably will. They all say this is a man of incredible integrity. And so that's where we find ourselves today. Well, we got a lot more to cover. Tomorrow, I might just mention, for those of you that listen to our local show, we are going to be talking a little bit about the debate between Ted Cruz, the senator, and Beto O'Rourke, the representative. And that was a debate took place last Friday. We'll look back at that debate and one coming up there, just more, I think, of interest to people in Texas, but it has some national implications. Then we're going to get into some other very important topics. We'll talk about kind of how we apply a Christian principle to our business areas, and Raymond Harris will join us again in studio, and then we'll come back to these allegations and continue to follow this all through the week. D-Day is going to be Thursday. That's when President Donald Trump sits down with Rod Rosenstein in the Attorney General's office. And that's the day in which I believe we're going to be hearing from Judge Brett Kavanaugh, and we'll see whether or not we hear from Christine Blasey Ford. And so Thursday could be a really busy day right here around Point of View, and I hope that you will take the time to visit our website and find some of these articles that we have posted today. I'm going to post a whole series of others tomorrow, and so those are available to you at the website pointofview.net. Going to be an interesting week. I hope you'll stay with us every single day as we go through a very significant week in the life of this nation. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. See you back here tomorrow on Point of View.
Go mobile with Point of View and take transformation with you on the go. Search in Google Play or the Apple Store for Point of View Radio, the Point of View Radio mobile app. Download it free today.
Good news. You are not stuck with your health care plan. Really. You have a choice, and it's a great one. It's called MediShare, and if you've heard about it and wondered what exactly it is, it's a way that people share their health care bills. And these are people who have a common faith, who want to be part of something beautiful that not only meets their healthcare needs, but the needs of others too. And it's people who love to save money, big time. MediShare members typically save $500 a month per family on their healthcare costs. That is a life changer for people. So this could be for you. Maybe it's what you've been looking for, a way to pay healthcare bills that's not only very smart financially, but it's even profound. MediShare is a nonprofit with 400,000 members nationwide who pray for and share with each other. So yes, you're not stuck. There's another way, and it could save you a lot. Find out more. Call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective.